Awesome. All right. So where we're going to kick off is we are on page 8. And where we're gonna like start reading is the very first full paragraph, no words can tell. And just to set the stage with where we're at, what happened to Bill Wilson is he goes to the town's hospital, a hospital in New York City, where he meets this doctor, Dr. William D. Silkworth. And Dr. Silkworth gives him knowledge of what it means to be an alcoholic. And he learns about the allergy of the body. He learns that once he starts to drink, he cannot control the amount that he takes. And he's like, oh, yeah, that sounds familiar. That sounds like me. But more importantly, he learns of the obsession of the mind. He learns that when he is sober, that he is a thought that takes him back again and again to the first drink. And he gets out of treatment and he relapses. He drinks again because self-knowledge is not a solution. Sobriety is not a solution. Self-knowledge is not a solution. And he goes back to the hospital and he gets a real fright. And that real fright is that he learns that he's going to die of alcoholism. He overhears Dr. Silkworth talking with his wife, Lois, saying that, Lois, I'm sorry. Bill's not going to make it. You're going to have to put him in an institution, or you're going to have to make funeral arrangements because he is not going to make it the year. And he hears that and he knows that, and he comes to this place of absolute fear and terror, and he wants to stay sober on that, but he can't. You see, if I have this illness, I can't stay sober on self-knowledge. I can't stay sober on fear. I can't stay sober on desire. I can't stay sober on self-will. I can't stay sober on human power. And so Bill Wilson has what I like to call, and where we're picking up. I know, I'm so excited. Sorry, Rob gave me a very subtle private message. He's like, hey, Paige, remember to make a note of this. And Rob, he's a consummate professional. He is on the ball. He's going to do it seamless so nobody knows what's going on. And I'm going to tell you all what's happening in the behind the scenes. Last week there was a spider crawling on my book, and I didn't tell you guys about that. So that I thought was a lot. It's just a little one, and it was very tempting for me not to give him a name. You know what I mean? Like, focus. So let's get into this. Let's get into the book before I start naming big book spiders. He's a little guy. He's doing okay. I'm sure he's fine. All right. And so what we have now is Bill Wilson's step 1 experience. Now, of course, for those that might be a little pedantic, you might be like, girl, what steps? They didn't have the steps before, but back then. This is what I like to call his step 1 experience. And this is an experience that I need. I need to have a step 1 experience. So page 8, first full paragraph. Welcome to those who have just joined us. It says, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And this is Bill Wilson's step 1 experience. He has hit that place of deep and profound loneliness. And if you guys remember, I talk a lot about loneliness, and I talk about loneliness is not really about a separation from other people. It's not really about my sense of separateness from you. Loneliness, and I talk about that, we know this to be true because I think of all the places where I have felt lonely and alone, in a stadium full of others, in a room full of other alcoholics, in the middle of a relationship, in the middle of an act of intimacy. I can feel lonely and alone in all those places. It has nothing to do with a sense of separateness from you, but everything to do with a profound sense of separateness from God. And he talks about the despair, and the despair is really, it's hopelessness. We talk about this transition from hopelessness to hope. And that despair is hitting that place of hopelessness, which another way to say it is to see the reality of my predicament as an alcoholic or an addict or a compulsive, whatever brings you to this study. Because the reality that is true is that if I have this illness as laid out in this book, I am hopeless. And he talks about that morass of self-pity. And that morass is like a bog being sucked into the self-pity. That quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I was joking about this yesterday. Growing up, I thought physical quicksand was going to be a much bigger hazard in my adult life. And I will let you know it has not come up once. I've not once found myself stuck in physical quicksand. But I have found myself stuck in spiritual quicksand, which I think is a beautiful metaphor for alcoholism, which isn't it my experience that the more I struggle, the more I try to do it my way, the more I try to manage, the more I sink. You know what I'm saying? So, or if you're like, no, I wasn't raised in the 90s where had a weird, like social pathological fear of quicksand, but also really adept at stop, drop, and roll. You know what I mean? Oh, stop, drop, and roll. I can do that with the best of them. That hasn't come up either. Just if you're wondering. So, stop, drop, and roll expert over here. But we haven't put it to good use. All right. But that quicksand that is pulling me in. I'd been overwhelmed. I had been overwhelmed. I'd met my match to alcohol was my master. This is that step one experience. He knows he is conceited in and of himself that he's done. In and of himself that he will drink again. That's really what we're looking at for our experience. When we're looking for a step one experience, and I need a step one experience. I need an experience with the first step, not a thought, not an idea, but a deep experience. And that experience is that idea that I will drink again. I have to stay sober. I need to stay sober. I want to stay sober. My life depends on staying sober. And I will drink again. That is the experience that I'm after. And that is Bill Wilson's step one experience. And sometimes we go to meetings and we hear things like, the only step I got to get 100% is step one. And step one, that has got to be my foundation. But one of the things I want to point out is to get step one 100% is to know that a time and place will come when I'm going to think I can drink again. Do you know what I'm saying? I know. So, Paul, your Armistice Day thing, that was the secret fact that Rob was trying to remind me of. We're coming up to Armistice Day. Sorry, that's not the right vibe. It's a solemn occasion here in Canada, but it's anyway. I'll explain the vibes in a mo. But that's what I'm after is that I can't stay sober on a step one experience. I'm after that concession. I will drink again. My foundation cannot be the first step because the first step is that I'm going to drink again. There's no foundation in that. The foundation for my life has to be all 12 steps as a way of life. And if I do not have all 12 steps rocking and rolling in my life, what does that mean? I have no foundation. That means there is no floor, there is no ground, it is groundless. I will drink again. And as we hear that and as we concede that, as we can see that in our life and in our experience, that gives us a sense of urgency that drives us into these later steps, that drives us to take the course of action, which, let's be real, is not appealing. Very few people are like, ooh, inventory. That sounds like a fun Saturday night. Woo! Just me. I'm wearing my inventory behooves me shirt, So just me. That's a fun time for me. Let me crank out that inventory. Yeah. But for most people, we gotta come to the end of ourselves. And that's what happened to Bill. In this moment, he has come to the end of himself. The end of his plans, end of his designs, and the end of the things that he can throw between him and his alcoholism. And it says, trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. See, the first step experience it's not a comforting thing. The first step experience really is to crack me open, to break me open, to see, holy moly, I got this thing. Holy moly, I'm going to drink again. I'm in trouble. And it said, fear sobered me for a bit. We can pause and ask ourselves, have I ever tried to stay sober on fear? And it'll work for a bit. It'll work until it doesn't. And that's the thing, is all the things that I try to put between me and the first drink, the first hoot, the first hit, the first high, they will work until they don't. And it is that when they don't that matters. And it says, fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of the first drink. And you can make a little note that is the mental obsession. And it says on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again. And it's one of the things last week, I'll let you know a little other than other than what was happening in the big book last week. I'll let you know a little behind the scenes. I was like, oh, darn it. I took too long because I always try to get to the bottom of page 8, because the bottom of page 8 is the beautiful transition from the hopelessness to hope. We take a beautiful transition in this part of the story. And I was like, man, I was kind of hoping I could get to the bottom of page 8, but I couldn't make it. I'm happy that I didn't, because Armistice Day is November 11th, today. And I didn't do the math, but Paul put in that it was 90 years ago today. And I'll trust your math. So if the math is wrong, no, I was going to say take it up with Paul. Don't take it up with Paul. He's being helpful. That's mean. You can take it up with me. But today, 90 years ago, this is what happened. And so what happened was inevitable. I want to be clear. Bill Wilson's relapse, page 8. Welcome, thank you. Page 8. Bill Wilson's relapse was inevitable. A relapse for an alcoholic, a relapse for an addict, a relapse for a compulsive, whatever brings you to this study is inevitable. And that relapse is inevitable. And the insidious insanity is the mental obsession. Now, I'm gonna crack open Lois Remembers, because we want to crack ourselves open step 1 experience, and let's crack open Lois Remembers, because then we don't need to crack open a cold one. I am so sorry that is what came to my mind. Let's go to page Lois Remembers. And if you don't have Lois Remembers, don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. But page 87, for those of you who came properly armed with facts about Lois Remembers, we don't need to have facts about that. We need to have facts about ourselves. But page 87. And I love this story because it tells me the power of the mental obsession. And it is the 1, 2, 3, 4th full paragraph. And don't worry if you don't got the book. It says, after leaving towns in late September, Bill stayed sober until November 11th, Armistice Day. His work prevented me from celebrating with him. Now, I want to pause there, because if you're in Canada, if you're in the UK, celebrating, and I know in the US it's Veterans Day. At least in Canada and in the UK, it's a very solemn affair. It's a very somber day. In North America, or not in North America, in Canada, it's Remembrance Day. It's a day of remembrance. But it says celebrating. Well, the context of this is a lot of the veterans who survived. I mean, they're, it's a decade and a little bit past, like they're there. And Armistice Day was the day that the fighting stopped. And it was this day of like a little bit like, we did it. We won the war. It was a little bit of a day of celebration. So I just want to contextualize that when it's like, oh, that feels tonally inappropriate, tone. So, as my work prevented me from celebrating with him, Bill went to Staten Island by himself to play golf. He's still got that golf fever, that he contracted. He's still got that. Haven't found a cure for his golf fever. When I reached home that evening, he was not there. At 5 o'clock in the morning, after a sleepless night, I found him unconscious, propped up against the iron gate in the basement airway, his head bleeding. Can I relate to some of that? I'll let you know, I'm a drunk that would go missing. I would just go missing. Do I relate to coming too injured? Do I relate to causing my loved ones worry? Can I relate to that? And here's what happened. It says, it seems the bus to the golf course had broken down. While waiting for another, he and his seatmate went into a pub. While Bill righteously sipped ginger ale, he carefully explained to his companion why he couldn't drink liquor. So Bill Wilson, he's going on the bus to go golf, and the bus breaks down, and they don't have cell phones to kind of doom scroll separately, so they have to talk to each other and stuff. Ooh, and they go to this nearby pub, and they're chit chatting, and Bill Wilson is doing the classic classic alcoholic overshare. Hey, I just met you. Here's my trauma, that sort of thing. And so he's like, yeah, I was just in the town's hospital, and my wife, she's going to have me committed. And like, if I take another drink, there's a thing that sets off in me where I need more and I need more and I can't stop and I burn my life to the ground. Man, he is giving this guy like a dissertation on step one. That's what's happening. And the guy's probably a little like, buddy, just met you. You know what I mean? And this is what happens. He's explaining to him the illness. He's explaining to him the allergy. He's explaining to him the obsession. And as soon the bartender came along and said, "It's Armistice Day. Have one on the house." And with visions of the first Armistice Day in France, and without another thought, Bill gulped down the drink. His companion was flabbergasted. "You must be crazy." "Yes," said Bill, "I am crazy. And I want to point out that is the power of the mental obsession." He is explaining. He is explaining the consequences. He's explaining the illness. He's explaining the symptoms. And it strikes, and there is nothing that he can do to stop himself from taking that first drink. And so let's go back to Bill's story. Bill probably didn't remember too much of it. It sounded like he got a bit of a nasty head injury on that one. But Lois remembered. So back to Bill's story. So then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. Right? How dark it is before the dawn. And that beautiful theme of I come to that place of hopelessness. And when I can get to that place of hopelessness, then I'm able to accept the hope that is on offer. I need to see the darkness before I can reach the light. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was to be the beginning of my last debauch. This was the beginning of the end. This was what kicked off his final spree. I was soon to be, and I want to point something out, I was soon to be catapulted. Catapulted. That is with some velocity, like a catapult. Different than a trebuchet, but still some velocity. Catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. And some of you guys know me. I loves me my sneaky prayers. I loves me my sneaky promises. I loves me my sneaky anything in this book, but I loves my sneaky descriptions of a spiritual awakening. And the fourth dimension of existence is a beautiful description of the spiritual awakening. So when we hear people talk about the fourth dimension of existence, sometimes it's like, girl, are we talking about somebody that's like tripping in a van, like the walls are carpet sort of deal? You know what I'm saying? Is that what you're on? Because I was a little worried they were talking about like, whoa, girl, like, I don't want that, right? The fourth dimension of existence. Oh man, I'm going to go on it's not a tangent, and it's an explanation, but we're going to have arts and crafts today, and I apologize for that in advance. But the fourth dimension of existence is a beautiful synonym for the spiritual awakening. And the fourth dimension is what it means to be awakened spiritually. And if you're like, girl, are you sure it doesn't mean tripping with some hippies in the woods, like, whoop, here is what it looks like. Here is what it looks like to become spiritually awakened. Here is what the spiritual awakening looks like. It says I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness. I didn't have any of that when I got here. Man, I wasn't even approaching those things when I got here. No wonder we needed a catapult, because it was a ways away. But I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a, oh no, way of life. Oh man, underline that. Way of life. What that means is I got to continue to do this thing. This is not a set it and forget it deal. This is a way of life, and a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And so what he's talking about is the spiritual awakening. And he was catapulted into that spiritual awakening. What that means is that it does not take long to get well. One ought not wait. Do you know what I mean? He wasn't like, and then I took a leisurely stroll into the fourth dimension of existence. You know, I worked on the Stairmaster of the fourth dimension of existence. No, catapulted, velocity. I want to get there quickly. But one of the most beautiful descriptions of this of the fourth dimension of experience, fourth dimension of existence that I ever heard, I got from an author by the name of C.S. Lewis, and he wrote a lot of religious works. He also wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And just if you're like, oh, that's familiar, that's why. And in it, he described, because if you're like me, I'll just spend the rest of the time trying to Google who this guy is and where I know him from, because I have that level of attentional issues. So this is how he described the fourth dimension of existence. So you and I here together today, sort of technically, are virtually in the third dimension of existence. You know what I mean? We're in 3D. And then I'm going to draw this little guy, and look at that. There he is, little stick figure guy. Sorry, I should have put a happy face because he's having a good time. You know, he's just living his life. He might not be alcoholic. He might not need the solution we have. He's having a good day. You know, we just didn't want us to feel bad for him. So he is in the second dimension of existence. And to be in another dimension of existence is to see the world at a greater depth. So now we are going to, I promise my art skills are better than it's going to look. Oh, this is not good. All right. So what I drew is a little road. I know. I can do better than this, but every time I forget that I'm going to do this. And so it's spur of the moment. So we have this little guy, handsome fella. And you guys who know that I do the history, I call them all handsome fellas, and this little road. And so to us, now please bear with my art skills. To us, we can see the depth. I tried, I did my best. We can see the depth, and we can see that that is a road. And that little stick figure right there is like, girl, are you out of your, he's saying it, girl, are you out of your mind? That is a triangle. It is a triangle. And so we are looking at the same thing, and we are seeing the world at a greater depth. And that is something that is experiential. If Howard and Kathy are still on the call, ineffable mcschmeffable is what that is. But experiential, which is to say, I need to experience it. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a lens of what that fourth dimension, that deeper lens of looking and seeing the world. Because actually, I'll keep this kind of a bit of an anonymous story. But I had a nudge in my heart today, and I've learned to listen to those nudges in my heart. And so I pick up the phone and I call this human being, not even a text. I call this human being, and I say, hey, I had you on my heart. I was just thinking about you. I just want to see how you're doing. And he's like, man, there's no coincidences. You have no idea how much I needed that call. I've been going through some stuff. You see, if I'm living in the second dimension, it's a coincidence. It means nothing. Or Paige, you're just thinking about somebody because you're codependent. But when I'm living in the fourth dimension, I can see that there's a depth I can see that there's a depth to this world. Do you know what I mean? And if you don't know what I mean, what I would encourage you is, one, you can ask me questions and I'll do my best to explain it. Two, let us catapult you. Let us help you take the actions that catapult you into the fourth dimension of existence so you get to experience what I'm talking about. And if you've ever gone to a meeting where you hear people say, well, I've never had a burning bush moment in AA or CA or whatever. Man, if you have not been in awe of the majesty of the presence of God in a tree, girl, you are missing out. You are missing out. It's some good stuff over here. And you don't got to take weirdo pills in people's fans to get there, So that's that. All right. And it says near the end of that bleak November. And I got sober in November. So for me, I'm like, oh, I'm a bleak November baby. It got bad, so I had to get better. You know what I mean? Ooh. And that paragraph to the next paragraph is that beautiful transition point. If you're working with sponsees, if you're doing your own big book study, do it. And that's a beautiful transition point to transition from problem to solution, because now we're going to see us lean in to that solution. So it says, near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected that there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night. And the next day, my wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. And that paints a picture, doesn't it? I don't know about you, but I was somebody, I lived with an alcoholic, and I had my own hiding spots. They were different than his. I will lay, I was going to say, I will propose that I think mine were better because one of us couldn't find the others. You know what I'm saying? Super humble. Uh, but like I related to that, having hiding spots. Can I relate to that, to try to hide my liquor, to hiding spots for my alcohol, for my drugs? Can I relate to that idea of, man, somebody is out there supporting me and I can't even make it to show up to support myself? Can I relate to that? And can I relate to what it's like to know that I couldn't make it through the night without another drink or another drug or another bite or another bet, whatever brings you to this study? Do you know what I'm saying? I can't make it through the night without one more, without one more, without one more. Can I relate to that? And it says, my musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. This is our guy. He doesn't have to be your guy, but he's my guy. Ebby Tatcher. Or, as I like to say, Throckmorton, because that's his middle name. Because that's what the cool kids call him. That's what I call him. The cool kids are you. You call him what you want. But Ebby Thatcher. So EBBYTHATCHER. If you're writing it down, actually, Rob will have it for you in the chat. And so Ebby Thatcher, yeah, he's giving him a call. And we're gonna talk all about Ebby, our guy Ebby. He doesn't have to be your guy, but he's my guy. I think he's pretty rad. And we'll talk, because Rob will be like, he wasn't that rad. And we'll talk about that. We'll go on a Throckmorton tangent. Maybe. Yeah, Throckmorton. Don't you worry, they won't be doing this on Wednesdays or Thursdays or Fridays or the earlier one on Mondays. Woo! So it says he was sober. He was sober, and that is in italics, which is to say, of importance. Now, we used to talk quite a lot about that idea of, if it was in italics, that means they had to go in and physically change the printing press, and that costs extra money. But then there was a little rumor that that might not be true. And we had some people investigating and looking into that, and it would have been true kind of up until the 1930s, but after the 1930s, probably wasn't true. But as I always say, let's not let the truth get in the way of a good story, because what's the point of that story? The point is not that they spent extra money. The point is, girl, it's important, pay attention. The girl, it's important, pay attention is for me, because you might have gathered that I have some issues paying attention. It's a struggle. So he was sober. So there's something remarkable about this. It says it was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. Condition? Sobriety. The condition of sobriety. It was years since he came to New York not hammered. Like, remarkable. And it says, rumor had it. And I'll be honest with you guys, I got this bad habit of, anytime I read rumor had it, I don't even know what the song is, but I go, rumor had it, because it's a song. And I apologize if I've immediately got that little earworm in your brain. That's my bad. So rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. So the rumor going around was that our boy Throckmorton, Ebby Thatcher, was locked up because of his drinking. And Bill Wilson says, I wondered how he had escaped. Now, I will tell you the visual that comes to mind to me. This is probably not what Bill Wilson meant, but this is the visual that it's by Reba. The song that's in my head is about, I was not going to get there, and I'll tell you what, I'm not a single mom who works too hard, who loves their kids and never stops. Something heart of a fire or something desire, survivor. I don't know. That's listen up, Paige. That's for Paige. I'm so sorry. If you came to the study and you're like, you know what I didn't want stuck in my head, all of that. So Keep coming. You'll get a new one stuck in. We'll be in a couple weeks we'll be getting to the Missy Elliott promises. So we'll get that one stuck in our head. We'll switch it up. So when it talks about I wondered how he had escaped, the visual that comes to mind to me is Bill Wilson imagining, Ebby Thatcher ripping the sheets and like tying them together to like, make a little like rope to shimmy down and then like running from the guards, how he had escaped. And keep in mind, he probably didn't mean that, but I'll tell you what he didn't mean. He didn't mean, I wonder how he had successfully completed his treatment program. That's sure as heck not what he means. I wondered how, it's wondered how he had gotten out of that hopeless situation. And it says, of course, he would have dinner and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was this time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility that is hopelessness. The very thing an oasis, drinkers are like that. So Bill Wilson, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair. And he is in that place of hopelessness. And his old drinking buddy, Ebby Tatcher, is going to be showing up and he's going to have some drinks and maybe they can recapture some of that, the fun and the ease and comfort that they had. And it's like water in the desert for him. Now, I'll be honest with you guys. For a long time, when I would read that story, I would get my little judgment pants on. I would put on my judgment pants. I'd put on my judgment hat, and I'd be like, ugh, get an airplane, chartering an airplane, you hoity-toity, silly little drunks. I can't relate to you. That's ugh. Well, let's read about it in Lois Remembers, and then let's see if we can relate. So if you have a copy of Lois Remembers, you really don't need one. And keep in mind, I'm only using Lois Remembers for Bill's story. So if you're like, I've got to get Lois Remembers, you do you. I was gonna be like, you don't have to, but you have the dignity of your own experience, which is an Al-Anon principle for Lois Remembers. Anyway, bottom of page 76, Lois Remembers. So it says, whenever his work took him near Albany, Bill would stop in to see his old friend Ebby, and they always got drunk together. On one of these sprees, a brilliant idea hit them. Ebby had heard that a new airfield was about to be opened by the Equinox House in Manchester, Vermont. They hired a plane. They wired the time of arrival to Miss Orvis, the owner of the hotel, and stocked up well for the flight. If you're wondering what stocked up well for the flight means, it doesn't mean they made sure they had their comfy little neck pillows and a little blankie. They were getting booze. You know what I mean? Booze for days. Let's put on the booze. Let's go. So that's what that means. And it says, this was a gala day for Manchester. This is a very, very important day for Manchester, Vermont. Can we relate to having to show up for things that are really important for other people? And it says, here, if you're like, are you sure, Paige? Are you sure this is an important day? Hold on. It says, Miss Orvis called out the band. Oh no, there's a band. We can tell it's important because they brought tubas. You know what I'm saying? Miss Orvis called out the band to greet the first airplane to arrive at the new airport, and the town fathers all gathered at the airfield. The town fathers are the people, the important fancy pants people of the town, I imagine they have top hats. That's my visual, because top hats signify importance. Talk to Mr. Peanut about that. So these are the important people. And it says, the plane flew in. And the band played lustily. You can't not play lustily with all those tubas. The band played lustily. The welcoming committee got ready. And Bill and Ebby stepped down from the plane and fell flat on their faces, dead drunk. Does that sound a little bit more familiar Maybe I didn't get my own airplane, but ooh, I have ruined a gal a day or two. You know what I'm saying? Can I relate to that? And as you see, I don't know about you, but when I was reading that, I'm like, who cares about your airplane bill? And I had my judgy pants, judgy hat. I was Judgy McJudgerson. But what is Bill Wilson trying to do in that paragraph? Bill Wilson is trying to do for Ebby Thatcher what Bill Wilson was doing for himself for 8 pages. He is trying to qualify his homie, that's a scientific term, his homie, Ebby Thatcher, as an alcoholic. He's qualifying him to us. And so when we talk about he was sober, what we're seeing is that there is something remarkable about this. This is a guy that we expect to be a hopeless drunk, just like Bill. Actually, there is a story, which I'll be honest is probably not true, but I'm not letting that get in the way of a good story. And I think Howard had to drop off the call, so I can get away with it now. We all know I'll get away with it with Howard here. But it's that idea that Bill was always like, man, if I ever get as bad as Ebby, I'll quit. Did I ever have anyone that if I ever get as bad as them, I'll quit? Oh, at least I'm not as bad as Ebby. Did I have any Ebbies in my life where I'm not like you? You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if that's true. It's probably not, but who cares? All right. So it said the door opened and he stood there, fresh skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? And what has happened in this moment is our guy, my homie, Ebby Thatcher, has carried a message of depth and weight, and he has not even opened his mouth. You'll notice Bill Wilson is not talking about his pocketbook. He's not like, here's this guy, Ebby Thatcher, how much he made. It's not about what he's wearing. It's not about how he's dressed. It is about the light that is on in his eyes. There is a glow to his skin. And I'll tell you, it's not about his, what's his skincare routine. It was not about that, What's your skincare routine? It's God, God is my skincare routine. That's not that, like mine isn't great, but but God, that's why it's glowing. That's that light on in his eyes. That is a message of hope. And I want to point out that I am called to be a demonstration of this program. Oh, Howard's back. We were just talking about me making up history things. I am so glad you're here. uh, but I am called to be a demonstration of this program. It does no good if I tell you to write inventory and you don't want to have a cigarette next to me because I'm going to go up like kindling. You know what I'm saying? If I'm dry, I'm happy to be here and happy to be sober. Why don't you work the steps so you can be happy like me? That's not a message of depth and weight. He hasn't opened his mouth. A lot of times it's like, man, how come they haven't seen the change? I want to ask myself, have I demonstrated the change? I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to live this way of life so that you cannot deny that a change has not happened to me. So that you might have this moment to think, what has happened to her? In terms of the change, not, whoa, what's happened to her? Did the spider bite her? Superpowers, pew pew. Like, what has happened? What is the change? That is who we are called to be. And it says, I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed, but curious, I wondered what had gotten into the fella. He wasn't himself. Saying no to drinks, are you feeling okay? This is not who you are, Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me. Simply but smilingly, he said, I've got religion. Now we're going to talk about what happened from Roland Hazard and how that connected with our guy, Ebby Thatcher. In this moment, when he's talking about religion, what he's talking about is the Oxford group, the Oxford movement. And he had been involved in the Oxford group. We're going to talk about how that happened, how that came together. But I want to point something out. 12-step, not religious. So if your response to religion is like Bill's, aghast, Don't you worry. But what I want to point out is Bill Wilson, top of page 8, we were diving into his step 1 experience. Bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand. The quicksand is that hopelessness. He's got nothing to grab onto. He's being sucked under. He knows he's going to die. He's met his match. Alcohol is his master. He is as willing as the dying can be. And before him, who is before him? But a demonstration of this power, a demonstration of the miracles before him, and as desperate and willing and open as the dying can be. This is Bill Wilson's response. I was aghast. Ooh, like, ooh, that's like, ooh, that's what that means. And it says, I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot? Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. Yeah, that starry-eyed look. Yes, that old boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rent. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. And what is Bill Wilson doing? He's dismissing the miracle that stands before him. Dismissing the miracle that stands before him. And I'll tell you, I've done that. I've come to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous, other 12-step rooms, and I was miserable. And I mean it. I was known for being able to suck the energy right out of the room. It was all bad vibes over here. Almost negative. Like, genuinely, that's who I was. And I would see those people who were happy. I actually, you know what it is? I would see people like me, and I could not stand people like me. So if you're judging me, what I want you to know is, get it. I get it. But what was happening was I was so miserable that it was like I thought they were full of themselves. Their self-assuredness was cockiness. Their confidence was like, oh, they just have better than. Oh, that is lovely, thank you. Their confidence was just like they thought they were better than me. If when you've been in a dark room, and I'm sure none of us know what that's like. We've been in a dark room for a long time, and somebody shines in a light, and that light is so bright that it's painful. I think it was a little like that. I was so comfortable in my discomfort. I was so comfortable in my darkness that people who seem to be free and at ease, it's like, man, I judge them. And so, to tie this around full circle, if you are annoyed by me, what I want you to know is that means that is a you problem, not a me problem. Ooh, it is a direct reflection of your spiritual condition because it was a direct reflection of mine. So if you're bothered by me, I'll help you write inventory. No worries, glad you're here. Thank you so much for coming. That wasn't like I am annoyed, I gotta leave. It was like I gotta go away, I have something going on. Don't worry. And I love that, like when he says, but bless his heart. Because, do you know what but bless his heart is? Because I am not from the South. I am from Canada. And oh, bless your heart. That's lovely. I want your heart to be blessed. Like I just want that for you. Bless your heart, you sweet summer child. You know what I mean? Oh, that is. It is a little passive aggressive. A 12-step equivalent to bless your heart is keep coming back. When you've said something that you just thought is just this beautiful, insightful idea, plan for my life. Hey, I just missed it right now. You know what I mean? It's true love. And you have your sponsor or somebody in the meeting says, keep coming back. It's one of those things that sounds real sweet, but can be used a little passive aggressively. So he's dismissing the miracle that stands before him. And he's like, gin would last longer than my preaching. But he did no ranting. What carried the message? But his experience. It says, in a matter-of-fact way, he told how 2 men had appeared in court. And if you're writing in your book today, you can make a little note there. We got 3 guys that we're going to write. We're going to write Shep Cornell, S-H-E-P, and Cornell, C-O-R-N-E-L-L. And then we've got our guy, Rowland Hazard, R-O-W-L-A-N-D, Hazard, H-A-Z-A-R-D. And then we got Seba Graves, Cebra, and then Graves, Graves. I know I said that quickly, but I know that Rob's probably got that in the chat or something. Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. And here's what I will say. At a recent piece, I thought, honestly, I'll be honest with you, I thought Howard was messing with me. I thought he was making fun of me, but no, turns out this is true. Seba Graves' middle name is Quakenbush. It's Quakenbush. So we got our guy, Roland Throckmorton Thatcher and Seba Quakenbush Graves. And if you were like, you know what I need? I need some merchandise. Like I need a sticker or a t-shirt that's got, Roland Hazard or Seba Graves. I need a Throckmorton or Quakenbush. I have made those. I don't know what's wrong with me. I've made these little silly little designs, but that's not what's important. Although now you will never forget Quakenbush. Seba Quakenbush Graves. You know what I'm saying? Hanging out with this guy, Ebby Throckmorton Thatcher. But what is the point of the story, or what happened in this story? So I'm going to break it down. I did not do a good job of preparing. I did all right. I'll do a quick little screen share to try to put things together, and let's just really quickly talk about the pieces that came together. So first and foremost, we got our guy, Roland Hazard. Now, we don't have to pop over to page 26. But on page 26, we see what happens is Roland Hazard. He comes from this incredible, wealthy American family. I believe they were involved in textiles. But he's a hopeless drunk. He can't stay sober. And he goes and he sees the best of the best in the United States and he drinks again. Did I try to see the best of the best in terms of treatment centers, counselors, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists can't stay sober? And then he goes all the way to Switzerland to work with Dr. Carl Jung. And he works intensively with Dr. Carl Jung. And he leaves treatment feeling this time will be different. Have I ever left treatment thinking this time will be different? Only he immediately got drunk. And he goes back after a while. He goes back to Carl Jung and he says, dude, what the heck? Do you know how expensive you are? Like, what the heck, my guy? Like, why did I relapse? And Dr. Carl Jung says, my bad. my bad. I know you want to hazard a guess as to what happened. Pun. But what happened there is you're an alcoholic. I misdiagnosed you. And people like you do not recover. And Roland Hazard, the gates of hell slammed on him with a clang. He had a first step experience. That gates of hell slamming with a clang. I am hopeless and I am trapped in the living hell of my life. That's what we're talking about. And out of desperation, Roland Hazard, it says, is there an exception? And Carl Jung says, yes. Here and there, once in a while, people like you have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. And in that moment, and he describes them as phenomenon, and that they appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangement. And he's like, I was trying to give you that, but I've never been successful with somebody of your type. And he lets Roland know, like, it's great if you believe in God or you go to church, but man, that's not enough. You've got to go find this thing, because the odds of this thing happening to you are like the odds of you getting struck by lightning. And from Carl Jung, Roland Hazard learns what our solution is. And our solution in 12 steps, is the spiritual awakening. Roland Hazard then gets involved with the Oxford Group. They happen to be a religious organization whose whole purpose was about having a deeper experience of God. And they had a course of action. They had a series of things that their members did, which would allow them to have a deeper experience of God. And he begins to stay sober. And that series of actions became our 12 steps. And our guy Throckmorton over here, Ebby Throckmorton Thatcher, he was looking at a 6 months jail sentence. They had a 3-strike law in Vermont, and he was pushing it. The first thing that he had done, I don't know, this is not necessarily the order, but the first thing he had done was he was doing a little bit of drinking and driving in rural Vermont in the 1930s. So there's not much to hit, but he found what he could, and he crashed into an old lady's farmhouse, rolled down the window, and asked for a cup of coffee. So that was one oopsie doopsies. The second oopsie doopsies, is if you've ever gotten a couple beers in and you get a little projecty, you know, you got that nice project 6 beer glow, like, let me do it, I can do anything, I'll snowboard, you know what I mean? And so he was like, I'm gonna paint the house. Now keep in mind, this is the house that the family had kind of put him in to like try to keep him out of trouble. And he's painting the house, and then there were birds. Now we know I enjoy my birds. Eddie, less so, does not enjoy the birds. He's afraid the birds are going to do what birds are going to do, which is ruin his half-finished paint job. So he does the only reasonable, logical thing that you can do when you're, let's say, about 12 beers deep, which is get a shotgun. Which we know he didn't hit a bird. We know he didn't. You know, he missed and probably took a big chunk of siding off the house with that shotgun. And that was his other oopsie doopsie. So he is looking at 6 months in jail. And Roland Hazard, our guy Roland Hazard, he shows up. And he shows up to Vermont because he's a wealthy guy. He's summering in Vermont. And it happens to be the exact week that Ebby Thatcher is standing trial. You know, a week later, a week earlier, maybe we're not here. And they're saying like, hey, maybe, you know, maybe you could help. And Seba Graves had actually also had a bit of a problem with alcohol, and he had been sober for a while as well. And the judge was actually Seba Graves's father, and he was like, you know what, you got to bring him back sober on Monday, but I'll let him go into your care. And Ebby Thatcher, with not great motives, he doesn't want to go to jail. He's got some impetus to work the steps to take the program of action. And so when it says on page 9, they had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action, what you can do is you can make a little note in your book that that simple religious idea is a solution. It is a spiritual awakening. And when it says a practical program of action, you can make a little note that for us today is the 12 steps. That is the 12 steps. And I don't normally go off on a Quakenbush tangent, but I'm here now. Seba Quakenbush Graves, he was sober at the time, and he struggled with drinking. And but Seba Graves ended up, you know, relapsing, and he didn't stay sober until I believe it was 52. It might have been 54 when he came and got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is kind of cool to get sober in a fellowship that he had not a small part in helping to create. So I think that's interesting as all heck. And his name is Quakenbush. Well, it's Seba Graves, but Quakenbush is the middle name. But in this moment on page 9, Bill Wilson has the 3 pieces of information that I need to know in order to achieve sobriety. He knows what his problem is. He knows what the solution is, and he knows how to get it. So the problem, the physical allergy, the mental obsession, he learned from his 2 visits, and the hopelessness, he learned from his 2 visits to Dr. Silkworth in the town's hospital. He's brought the solution through Roland Hazard, through Ebby Thatcher, the spiritual awakening, and the program of action, the 12 steps, again, through that way. So in this moment, he's got the 3 pieces of information. Now, the next sentence goes on to say, that was 2 months ago. 2 months ago. And the result was self-evident. It worked. Our guy, Ebby Thatcher, he doesn't have to be your guy, but my guy, Ebby Thatcher, he is 2 months sober. 2 months sober. You know, sometimes we hear things like, I got to wait a year to sponsor. You can't sponsor. I heard that when I was newly sober. You know, we would not be here if that was a suggestion. 2 months sober. But again, we talk about catapulted. The next time we talk about the 4th dimension, we're going to talk about getting rocketed. So they weren't just using like, you know, some centrifugal force or whatever it is that like catapults. There are people who are going to be like, actually, Paige, it is this type of force, and I am wrong. But they added rocket boosters to this thing. You know what I mean? Rocket boosters. 2 months sober. Ebby Thatcher is showing up in 12-stepping. Ebby Thatcher is carrying a message of depth and weight. 2 months sober. I want to emphasize, it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to recover. It does not take long to have a spiritual awakening. And that is true if you're new here today, if you're coming back from a relapse, if you're a chronic relapser, or if you've been around a long time and the magic's gone. and you are miserable, and there are things that are piling up on you that you don't think that these stupid steps could possibly solve. I will say that inventory behooves me, so it'll help. Uh, but if that is our experience, I promise you it does not take long to get well. 2 months sober carrying the message. And one thing I will say very quickly is he probably didn't even have the best motives. Probably didn't even have the best motives. Rob will tell you, he was a bit of a mooch. He was. He was. And God uses all of us, doesn't he? God uses all of us with our terrible motives, with our imperfections, with our defects. He was also really codependent, which is a whole story for another day. But God uses us exactly as we are. He had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. Hopeless. There that is again. And we'll leave it there for this week. And next week we'll pick it up and we'll have a look at Bill Wilson wrestling with the idea of step 2. And we will see him have what will become his step 2 experience. So we'll stop the recording and we can wrap it up with a prayer.